Welcome back to Revealing the Truth. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we just finished a sterling interview with Phil Haney, author of See Something, Say Nothing, as we're doing today's expose on Islam. Joined together with three of WND's very own authors, and it is a pleasure to introduce you to Leo Hohmann, who actually is a veteran journalist and news editor directly for WND, as well as one of their authors who has a particular focus on immigration and Islam. Prior to joining WND, he worked more than 2 decades as a newspaper reporter and editor in suburban Atlanta and in Charlotte and Raleigh, North Carolina. He is the author of Stealth Invasion, Muslim Conquest Through Immigration and Resettlement Jihad. Welcome, Leo Hohmann, to Revealing the Truth.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here today with you, Eric.
Well, we're delighted you're with us, Leo. You have touched on a subject here that I think that every American has been suspicious of the announced plans of resettling 10,000 Syrian refugees into our borders. During that same time that I call it the Penn and Teller Act. While we were looking over here, there were thousands of Somali refugees coming in. There were thousands of other Muslim refugees coming in, and we were so distracted by the federal government's mission to keep our eyes focused on Syrian refugees that they managed to bamboozle the public into believing that they never met that goal, and therefore look how good we did and look how we protected you. But this strategy of migration, immigration, resettlement is exactly what cost Europe. And while we were distracted by the eloquent prose and waxing eloquently from the White House and from the press room, our government was advancing the cause of Islam through immigration jihad. Help us understand what's been going on for the last decade.
Yeah. Great question.
Leo, we're having a little bit of trouble with the connection on your end.
Started in the 70s, saying involving Americans.
Leo, we're having a little bit of trouble with the connection.
Is this any better?
That's much better.
That's much better. Huh, I didn't. Okay.
What happened?
The wonders of Skype.
Yes. Well,
can you hear me now?
I can hear you now,
okay,
and I'm going to ask you, if you would, to tell us your answer again, starting from the beginning.
Okay. Yeah, Eric, that's a great question. This program, Refugee Resettlement Program, started basically in the 1970s. It had a very humanitarian face to it. It started out with resettlement of many Vietnamese, rescuing them from the communist dictatorship that was taking over their country. And so it started off on a good foot. The UN the United Nations had very little involvement in our refugee program at that point. We were able to call our own shots for the most part as far as which refugees we wanted to bring from which countries and resettle them into our cities here in America. However, about sometime around the mid to late 1980s, the program started to change. We got involved in a proxy war with the Russians, as you'll recall, in Afghanistan. And President Ronald Reagan at the time referred to those they were memorialized and glorified in the movie Rambo. I think it was Rambo 3 or Rambo 4. And it turned out that the program was making a subtle turn. And it continued in that direction under the first President Bush, who brought in refugees, Muslim refugees from Iraq in the first Gulf War. President Clinton stepped it up a notch, bringing them here from other countries, including Eastern Europe. Every single war we've gotten involved in, it seems like in the last couple of decades, it's resulted in more Islamic refugees. Of course, President Obama has taken it to a new level. He's continued all the previous programs, as you refer to, the Somali program, bringing 9,000 to 10,000 Somalis here, hardcore Sharia-compliant Muslims from the nasty little country of Somalia, which we fought. We had a nasty little defeat there, as you recall, and was brought out in the movie Black Hawk Down.
Right.
And then it continued from there. The second Iraq War, more refugees. You know, the little Syrian civil war that turned into a huge conflict that we never directly got involved with, but President Obama and Hillary Clinton stoked with weapons transfers to that country, supporting the rebels against the secular regime of Bashar Assad. That is another huge program now, bringing approximately 12,000 last year and probably more this year, unless Mr. Trump stops it, from that hardcore Sharia compliant society. So yeah, it's just sort of fed on itself, and what we're doing is transforming American cities and towns by changing out the people, basically. And we have the United Nations picking the refugees for us.
Right. The statistical analysis of this resettlement jihad, this migration jihad, is supported by research that shows that when the percentage of the population, Muslim population in a particular area increases from 2% to 4%, then the next milestone 4% to 8%, as we see in France, that there are more acts of terrorism and there's less outrage. There is more of those who are quietly Muslims, the neighbor, the friend, the San Bernardino couple that everybody so liked. They were such a loving, lovely couple, that as the percentage of population increases, their influence increases, their authority increases, their funding increases to support this jihad. That it's not a violent one, it is a penetration strategy, and it seems quite deliberate, and it seems quite formulated as a cohesive game plan. It does not seem random in any way. Is it your experience and your studies that you have uncovered that this is a methodology of advancement for the colonization of nations?
Absolutely, and it was all spelled out in a Muslim Brotherhood document published in 1991 called the Explanatory Memorandum for the Brothers in North America, giving a grand strategy. In this document, which was seized by the FBI in 2004 from a safe house in Northern Virginia, and the entire strategy is laid out in that document. There's nothing longer that is secret about this Machi to infiltrate. And it's basically a three-pronged strategy. There's three basic stages, and you alluded to, you know, the consolidation, where the Brotherhood uses laxation laws like we have to sort of build peace. And we've seen an explosion in this country since 9/11. Most of those mosques, 75 to 80% of them, received funding, at least partially, from Saudi Arabia, which is a danger sign. The most virulent, radical form of Islam is the Salafist, Wahhabist brand, which comes straight out of Saudi Arabia, as you know. And there are some peaceful Muslims, but you're not going to find them in Saudi Arabia.
Right.
And so these are the people that are are funding our mosques for the most part and the growth of Islam in America.
We're seeing the
And the
increase.
second, I believe we're sort of moving on to that second stage now. They've been building this base, as we've talked about,
Right.
Eric, for 35 years now, and they're ready to transition to the second phase, which is, they're already into the agitation, the lawfare, where we're seeing all the lawsuits being filed by CARE and other Muslim groups against employers for women, wanting to wear the jihad, the hijab in the workplace. We're seeing teaching of Islam showing up in our public school system.
Right.
For heaven's sakes, we've been kicking Christianity out since the 1960s, but now we're inviting Islam in. We're seeing, field trips to mosques. We're seeing imams and other Muslim representatives showing up in schools, providing propaganda to our students, just sort of planting the mindset, the Islamic mindset, into the young school children. This is all things that is, part of this grand strategy. And the third and final stage, which I believe Europe is getting ready to enter into, is outright warfare.
Right. The complete no-go zones, the implementation of Sharia, and they are then opposed to the local government structure, not adhering to whatever constitutional rule of law is in place, but replacing with their own, like we're seeing in London, with their own court system that's being acknowledged by the first Muslim mayor of London. What we're finding is, Leo, at least my observation, is this has become a top-down strategy, that the leadership of these countries or these cities are buying into this, endorsing it, and paving the way for the advancement of it. Therefore, I hold Barack Obama culpable in the advancement, that this was at the highest level being supported as a line item agenda, if you would, of the Obama administration, and would have been continued under a Clinton administration.
Absolutely on target with that. It starts, like you said, very top down from the United Nations, which we've seen them come out in their 2030 agenda last fall with a new agenda for the world. It puts a major emphasis on cities, sort of bypassing nations, go directly to the cities, appeal to the mayors, and be welcoming and inclusive to migrants from around the world. And these migrants in the third world have rights, if you listen to the United Nations, have rights here in our country. They have a right to come to our country. And they don't even have to be legitimate refugees. They could be merely downtrodden folks in a third world country seeking a better economic opportunity. And so the traditional definition of a refugee is being turned on its head. It used to be, set from the Geneva Accords of 1951, right. I believe it was, where the refugee had to prove that they had a well-founded fear of persecution, either due to their religious or political beliefs, and or some sort of personal held beliefs. And this is just not the case anymore. Under the United Nations new definition, it could merely be as little as, I live in a poor country and I want to migrate to a more wealthy welfare state. And so we've seen this idea trumpeted by the Obama administration. And there was a woman who infiltrated, this is outlined in my book, a conference call last year that was headed by Cecilia Muñez, one of the president's top advisors on immigration. And they talked about in this conference call planting seedlings in host communities and watering the soil, which is sort of the preparatory work that they do to propagandize the local population of the community, get them ready to accept the refugees, nurture the seedlings, give them all that they need, all of their legal needs if they encounter legal problems, teach them how to navigate the system, teach them how to be politically activists, not just to vote, but that is a major thing, to vote, but to even be activists in favor of this globalist view of welcoming the world into our cities, regardless of whether the world wants to assimilate to our values or whether we're supposed to, in the eyes of these people, adapt our cities to their values, which is what they call integration. And integration is something far different than assimilation.
Right.
And so this conference call laid it all out, and eventually the seedlings will rise up and become independent on their own and overtake the host community. They're open about this. We see this same language in the founder of Welcoming America, Mr. David LaBelle, has been quoted using similar language, and so on different occasions. So it's not just one conference call; it's pervasive, and we've looked through, sort of connected the dots by looking at all these documents.
It's interesting that earlier this morning we talked with Dr. G.M. Davis. We then talked to Phil Haney, and now we're talking to you, a recognized journalist with the world's largest news organization. WND is now the largest Christian news site in the world with, I believe, over 8 million individual hits every month and unique hit visitors, and over 70 or 80 million visitors per month. And as we've talked to Dr. Davis, as we talked to Phil Haney, as we talked to you, you are college educated, you are intellectual people that do not follow rabbit trails or take the blue pill or the red pill, follow rabbits down holes. You are not conspiracy theorists. You are actually well-documented, professional journalists, professional writers, or in the case of Phil Haney, professional law enforcement, all coming to the same conclusions, that there is a coordinated event of a magnitude that many of us have referred to as a Trojan horse, that this hidden agenda, this unholy alliance that we see both biblically and we see sociologically between our government and the governments of the world, who are the largest state-sponsored terrorist organizations that have us on their radar, a sworn enemy, if you will. We negotiated the giving of $850 billion to the largest sworn enemy in the world, to America. I happened to live in Atlanta at the time of the fall of the Shah. Lived through that whole Carter administration and all of that when Atlanta was a small city. And we've seen the radical shift. We have not backed the winning team in this battle yet. It almost seems from Clinton to Bush to Obama, a shift in America's leadership commitment to the Constitution of the United States to ensure the domestic tranquility, to provide for the common defense, that we've actually given more rights to a non-U.S. citizen and protection than they give to you and I born on American soil. It has become so skewed in such a way as you and I would be called Islamophobes. You and I would be labeled and persecuted as outspoken, as going against the flow and the tide of secular humanism for the sake of acceptance and brotherhood and all this. And we're calling this dangerous, and we're calling this a hidden agenda, and we're calling this a colonization of the West. But we're not crazy, are we?
No, Eric, there's just too much evidence. Like you said, we're not basing any of our writings on one document here, one document there. We're finding a coherent thread throughout our research, and what you just alluded to there is a kind of a one of the main themes that I try to shed light on in my book is it would be one thing if you just looked at the numbers, and they are staggering. 130,000 green cards issued per year to people from Muslim-dominated Sharia-compliant countries. I'm not going to say that everybody who comes here from those countries hates America, but you can darn well bank on the fact that many of them do.
Right.
And don't share our values that are enshrined in the Bill of Rights. Freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom of the press, to speak freely out about our opinions, no matter what they might be. You cannot speak against Muhammad in these countries. You cannot speak against Allah. You cannot do a fair critical analogy of Islam. It's just simply forbidden. And these people come here with those values for the most part. Like again, I said, there is definitely going to be exceptions. But I do believe that the majority from these countries are coming here to change our country rather than coming here to experience the great fruits and freedoms of our Constitution. And it just seems like the globalists, you mentioned an unholy
Leo, we lost you again. I think it might be a connection on your end.
Yeah, I think I've briefly lost connection. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're back on.
Yeah. The most disturbing unholy alliance, in my opinion, is that between the secular left, who adhere to a globalist worldview, and the religious, political Islamists. Both are seeking global hegemony. They may have differences on who should run it in the end, but they both want to, in the end, do away with Christianity and eliminate borders, eliminate national borders. If you study Islam, a major theme of Islam is that you are to have loyalty to Allah and to Islam, number one, and not to your country. You're to have loyalty to your country only to the extent that it honors Islam. And that's just a far different view that we have in America, where we consider everybody having the right to worship as they please.
Right.
And but here we are inviting people in and saying that they're new Americans when they hate American values of freedom of speech, press, and religion, and they want to make Islam the dominant religion. They don't just want it to be one of many. And that is another thing that is spelled right out in that explanatory memorandum from the Muslim Brotherhood. The end goal, they say, is to have Islam reign supreme as the only religion in America.
Right. When the president signed his executive orders saying that incoming Muslims do not have to swear allegiance to the Constitution or to the defense of America, that he granted a waiver for them so that they could continue to be more committed to Sharia, to the Quran, than coming into our borders and being given rights, benefits, and privileges, and not having to swear allegiance, as my family, when they came here, had to leave behind Hungary, had to leave behind Western Ukraine and Southern Poland, and swear allegiance to the Constitution of the United States. And both my grandfather, who came in 1904, and my father, who came, his family, in 1934, they all served, my grandfather in the United States Navy, my father in the United States Army. They served this nation. This is not the cut of the immigrant base today. It's nothing like it used to be.
I wish I could say it was, but you're exactly right, Eric. I mean, my forefathers came here in basically the 1920s from Italy and Germany, And just like you know, they came here not knowing much English,
Right.
but they made that a priority. They immediately found jobs that could sustain their families. You know, not just some minimum wage jobs that required the government to fill in the gaps with food stamps and subsidized housing and Medicaid. This is what we're seeing. You know, 80% nearly, I'm sorry, 90% of refugees from the Middle East are on food stamps. I mean, this was unheard of in our ancestors' days when they came here in the 20s, 30s, 40s. You know, they were expected to provide for their families. And if they couldn't do that, they had to show that they had a sponsor that could take care of them, a family sponsor or somebody, until they could, you know, get on their feet with full and find full-time work. And you know, for mine, it was they worked in the auto factories, they worked in breweries in Detroit, you know, and they made an honest living. But here today, it's a different story. And again, it goes back to assimilation. They're not being required to learn the language. They're not being required to be self-sustaining. Oh, they say they're self-sustaining. The resettlement agencies with Catholic Charities and Lutheran Social Services, if you read their websites, they'll say that, you know, the vast majority, I think 80 or 90% of our refugees are self-sufficiently living within 3 months of resettlement. And that sounds good, but when you actually question them on what that means, it doesn't mean what it says. What it really means is that they're set up on all the government welfare goodies,
Right.
and therefore they don't need donations from the Catholics or the Lutherans anymore.
You're exactly right. We're talking with Leo Hohmann of WND, both WND Books, author, and a staff news editor and journalist for WND, so that is also your employer. He's written a book called Stealth Invasion, The Muslim Conquest Through Immigration and Resettlement Jihad. Because of our delay in getting started with some connection issues, we're not going to go to break. We're going to go straight through because I believe you have something very important to share. But while we're having this conversation, I want to encourage our viewers to go to ianbn.com, our website for the Igniting a Nation Broadcasting Network, and go to Books and Media, look for Stealth Invasion. It'll be under today's date at the 12 o'clock hour, and order this book right away. You can have it there in 2 days. Amazon Prime, still time to get it in. And this is combined with See Something, Say Nothing, and with the House of War by Dr. G.M. Davis, all from WND Books, a wonderful partner of ours and supporter of this network, providing us with their great authors to interview that have the same biblical worldview that we do, who share in our values for revealing the truth, for being bold voices in a world which has now become meek and timid in the face of this aggression. We stand united together to stand up against censorship and labeling and persecution because of our voice. We're willing to speak out about these issues. And today we dedicated the entire program to the religion of peace and dispelling every lie that's contained within the Quran that it's not a religion of peace. It's only a religion of peace to those who adhere to it. It's only peaceful among Muslims. For us as the infidels, until we become part of the family, there is no peace with us. And so it is the kind of propaganda we expected out of Nikita Khrushchev, the kind of rhetoric that we heard during the communist manifestos and the advancement of communism. But communism was a Cold War. This is not a Cold War. As a matter of fact, there is nothing like a Cold War, and this is nothing like a Cold War. This is branches of methodology for the penetration, for the conquering of civilizations, for the purpose of submission and jihad any way they can, and one of the strategies is through immigration and resettlement. And stealth invasion takes you on that journey to understand. When you hear of these last 8 years of this agenda, when you hear the United Nations playing a part as being a broker of migration strategy, you're looking at a cohesive strategy for the advancement of what Leo calls a stealth invasion. It is sanctioned by our government. Our borders are open. It's welcoming. Our societies are now bringing in and being prepared to bring in more refugees. And we have one opportunity in this coming administration to turn the tide, but it's going to take an informed public. It's going to take the same informed public that voted in this last election for a change to be aware and cognizant of these various strategies, of the government deliberately hiding, of understanding the fundamentals of Islam and no longer burying our heads in the sand, to be ignorant of this act of war against America, against our freedoms, against our Constitution, against our First Amendment rights, because we would be subjugated to Sharia if they had their will. We're talking with Leo Hohmann about stealth invasion. Leo, take me on a journey now. You got the idea for this book when? What made you decide to do the kind of expose, critical analysis of this strategy, knowing that the American public was unaware? When did you hit that realization that 350 million Americans, really the vast percentage, don't have a clue as to what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, and I was one of them. I mean, I started, as you said in your introduction of me, I worked for more than 2 decades at local newspapers in Atlanta and in a couple of different cities in North Carolina. And, you know, I was blissfully ignorant. I had even covered immigration issues. And, you know, when I started at WND in the summer of 2014, I was covering the issue of Central Americans massing at our U.S.-Mexican border. As you recall, it was happening big time in the news at that point. And it was through those articles, one in particular where I had mentioned a Catholic Charities branch in a Catholic church in, I believe, California, that was helping some of these, you know, Central Americans, families, children, and young people, feed and clothe them, sheltering them from the government and police, if the local government, I should say, you know, because the Obama administration was all for bringing them in. But I was writing about some of these things, and a reader reached out to me actually and said, you know, this is illegal immigration, and you and WND and others have written a whole lot about illegal immigration and the perils that are brought upon our country from that aspect of the whole immigration program. But he challenged me to look at something else. As you said earlier, we often have our eyes on the wrong thing as conservatives. And I found that to be the case, because he said, look at legal immigration. We have a huge problem with illegals, 400,000 or 500,000 a year coming across. We don't know exactly who they are or how many, but it's in that neighborhood. But, you know, we have more than 1 million coming in legally under scores of different visa programs and green card programs. And one segment of that is refugee resettlement. And that is a particular concern that you might want to look into. So I started finding out all this new information that I had never known about legal immigration, and how we're bringing in more than 1 million per year. It's up to 1.3 million now on green cards. You know, over 100,000 refugees, people who are not screened appropriately. You can't even screen many of them appropriately. It's impossible. We rubber stamp visas, you know, from, you know, work visas, student visas, entrepreneurial visas, lottery program visas, you know, it's just unending. Fiance visas, you know. Mr. Saeed Farouk, who shot 10 people at an office Christmas party in San Bernardino a year ago. He brought his fiancée here from Saudi Arabia. She's of Pakistani origin. Took her passport photo in a full burqa. And there was no red flag there for our immigration screeners to maybe look a little deeper at this woman and find out exactly who she was. And this is the type of thing that's going on. And so, you know, the more I started into it, one thing led to another. I eventually had written and had published more than 100 articles. And the book division at WND contacted me and said, you know, this is a story, if put together, that we think might shock a lot of Americans, just like it shocked me when I started looking into it. And so about 50–60% of the book is research that I had already done, and then I did you know, more research and got you know, more new material to include into the book. And sort of the second half of the book, the first half is largely laying out these programs, a lot of, you know, history and of the programs and numbers. We take a look at Europe and what's happened there, and our position is that America is on the exact same path, just maybe, you know, 15–20 years behind. But then later on in the book, we try to give the story with real life instances and show how, as you pointed out, it's not just folks coming here in large numbers. That would be bad enough. But they're not assimilating, and they're expecting us to give them special treatment, special privileges that even us Americans don't have. Right. And so I show how this works in real time, on the ground in places like Twin Falls, Idaho, where we had a little 5-year-old special needs girl who was raped by 3 refugee boys at an apartment complex, a low-income apartment complex in Twin Falls where she lived. Her mother stepped inside to use the bathroom for literally 3 minutes, and when she came out, her little girl was gone. She was watching her play outside the apartment. And if it hadn't been for an elderly 80-something-year-old grandmother living in that same apartment complex, it would have been even worse than it actually went down that day, because she caught the boys in the act. And one of them, the oldest boy, 14-year-old, was actually filming the other 2 in the laundry room with this girl. They had her clothes off. They had touched her inappropriately, and they were getting ready to do some horrible, horrible things to that little girl. And Eric, what happened in that community, you know, these globalists always feed us the line that these refugees are good for our communities. They bring greater diversity. They bring economic opportunity. And then humanitarian-wise, we're helping the downtrodden. They don't. And while some of that may be true, especially helping the downtrodden, I'm not convinced at all that refugees are good for our communities financially or culturally, because it's a huge cost burden. But while some of what they say may be true, they gloss over the dark side of this program. And that's what stealth invasion is. The purpose of it was to shine a light. And people may say, oh, he's not being fair when they read this book. Some critics may say he's only pointing out the, you know, this, that, and the other, and he's ignoring how, you know, Mohammed over here was highly successful and became a millionaire. You know, that's 1 in a million. It has happened. But you know, the mainstream has done a fine job of that. They tell us all the flowery good news stories about the refugees. That is not what was needed. Somebody needed to take a critical look at the program, lift the lid, and find out and tell the American population the dark side of what's going on. And so we had this story in Twin Falls, and the other side of the story, Eric, is not just that it happened, but how the media, the local media, covered it up. The national media tried to cover it up until I and a couple of others started reporting on it. It never made the mainstream national TV news or anything like that. And then the U.S. Attorney for Idaho, an Obama appointee, Miss Wendy Olson, you talk about imposing Sharia on the American population. This is how it works. Voluntarily, by people like Wendy Olson, who, when we started shining a light on this horrific incident in her community, she had no jurisdiction to interdict herself into this case. She's a federal attorney. This was a local criminal case. But she came out with a statement threatening the people of Idaho that if they had anything that was false or inflammatory to say about this case or the perpetrators, that she would not hesitate to prosecute them. Now, that was a stunning development for anyone who was paying attention. And because we reported that, people in the legal profession from all walks of life, not just conservatives, even some liberal constitutional attorneys came out and wrote pieces and said, this is this is not kosher. This is not what we do in America. We don't threaten to arrest people who might have a critical word to say about somebody or some faith or whatever. Right. And you don't see it about Christianity. There's open season on criticizing Christianity. Excuse me.
And imagine what I go through as a Jewish believer.
Exactly. We're used to that as believers. And Muslims should get used to it. But they're not. And they've had the government on their side for the last 8 years. This is just one case in Idaho. There's another one in Lawrenceville, Georgia, small town outside of Atlanta, where a Somali female refugee came out of the woods on the day after Memorial Day last year, saw a flag flying in this neighborhood from somebody's mailbox, flying from a 6 to 8 foot PVC pipe as the flagpole. She swipes the flagpole off the mailbox and charges at the woman of the home, who was sitting in the garage with her young daughter sipping coffee that morning, admiring the flag. All of a sudden, this woman in a burqa comes and steals their flag and charges them and beats the mother with the flagpole. Well, do you know what? That sounds like a hate crime, does it not? That sounds like the quintessential hate crime,
of course.
If you had to make one up. But it was turned over by the local police to the FBI, and the FBI said, nothing to see here, no hate crime. Move along. They didn't even interview the victim. They didn't interview the witnesses, neighbors who saw this entire thing go down. And so this is what we're dealing with. You talk about special rights and special privileges. This woman was merely charged with a misdemeanor, simple battery. Could you imagine if you or I attacked a Muslim woman like that at her own home?
Oh my goodness. The outcry would be from the White House down.
Right. So this is what we're talking about. It's far more advanced than people are aware, and we tell some of these stories in the book that got very little media attention, but they were documented. The Lawrenceville story had one little brief in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. No follow-ups. No asking the FBI why didn't you file hate crime charges. It had one story in one of the local TV stations. So it's documentable,
right?
But it's also lamentable on the way it was covered.
I find the media culpable as the fourth branch of government in this cover-up, in this spin, as if they were on the payroll and got funding from CARE itself and directly from Saudi Arabia. We know that the Clinton Foundation was deeply involved in activities and favors. I can only imagine that the major corporations who have now been infiltrated by an agenda of the Muslim Brotherhood since 1928, and more overtly since 1952 in America, and then predominantly in the 70s as the strategy was to infiltrate corporations, insurance companies, banks, news organizations, and ultimately government appointments, that the strategy has been quite effective. That we're seeing a level of censorship in America that is unprecedented. That all the pundits got the polls wrong, all the pundits got the election wrong, and all the pundits are getting this issue wrong. They are spinning it with the same words. And what's so interesting was the San Bernardino. the press conference that night, how did Kerr and the brother-in-law get access to primetime media to be elevated to the point where the Kerr representative was there with the brother-in-law to speak kindly about the perpetrator that killed 13 co-workers in San Bernardino? You and I both know you don't get access to the press that way. You don't get on primetime television. That's primetime, premier, cost you a fortune to get your story told.
Absolutely.
But here we are as an alternative media source, and we're covering this, and we're looking at this from a biblical worldview, covering the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth, and exposing these kind of situations. And mainstream media still, for their sense of fair and balance, or really the exposés going back to, where is the Geraldo Rivera of the Islamic expose? You have become Leo Hohmann. You and Dr. Davis and Phil Haney have become the really investigative journalists to blow the lid off of this. And because these are all founded in truth, they're all backed up by documentation. Phil's claims about the government, you're looking at our immigration and migration strategies, are backed up and substantiated by fact, irrefutable fact, not pick and choose fact to support your hypothesis, but actual statistical analysis of the information that's publicly available. And we have to be the voice, because if it's not us, then who's going to do it? We've actually waited. We deferred to mainstream media to take the ball and run with it. And for some reason, this administration, the Bush administration, the Clinton administration, all had sway over media to the point where they spun it from the White House and everybody drank from the same cup. That is the Jim Jones mentality that has taken over America's culture. That we're going to be spoon-fed by ABC, NBC, CNN, Fox, MSNBC. And our parents used to believe in the fact that it wouldn't be in the paper if it wasn't true. It wouldn't be reported on television if it wasn't true. They trusted Walter Cronkite. They trusted Dan Rather. But here we are, you and I are questioning our leadership of the government, our congressmen, especially our career congressmen that have ridden the tide. They've ridden this wave. They've been on that surfboard, and they've ushered in this new theocracy, which is bending the knee to Islam, and the nation is bending its knee to Islam. And the rise in mosques, the rise in the influence, and the mere fact that Muhammad Abbas, out of Israel, said that he was issuing instructions to the imams to teach a certain perspective on the annexation of Judea and Samaria, the reunification of Jerusalem, and primarily admitted publicly for the first time, because you and I hear that statement that he's now telling them what to say, that they've been telling him what to say all along. That these are havens for the assembly of terror. These are places that are fostering and providing a safe haven for education and growth and the advancement of jihad within America. And Saudi Arabia is pouring the money into America. And in your city and in my city and suburban cities and capital cities, specifically targeted capital cities of every state, to have a premier mosque in that capital city. Montgomery, Alabama, here is one half of a completely depressed area, has a $10 million mosque being built in it, preparing the way for the future generation to come. So our urban renewal programs now have to include a mosque.
And don't dare a city deny a mosque. I don't care how good of a basis they have to deny it based on, non-religious issues such as traffic, noise, proximity to residential neighborhoods. They're literally building humongous mosques right on top of residential neighborhoods. And if the local community were to be so, if they should deny this mosque, we are seeing the U.S. Department of Justice immediately step in and threaten to sue. And if a threat doesn't do it, then they will file the suit against the local community. We're not, this doesn't happen when they deny church expansions or church projects. Different standard, again, being applied. So you're absolutely right.
Leo Hohmann, thank you for being with us here on Revealing the Truth. We're talking about his new book, Stealth Invasion, Muslim Conquest Through Immigration and Resettlement Jihad. This day was spent with the great authors from WND. Tomorrow's program will have Bill Cloud on with us, talking about Esau Rising, another WND author. Also joined tomorrow, we'll be talking to Shannon Dietz about coming out of abuse. And then Jen Forstoff will be sharing her story about Chosen for Charlie, how God chose her to raise a child with disabilities. And these are the heartfelt stories, the biblical stories, the truthful stories that we embrace here on Revealing the Truth. Leo Hohmann's book, Stealth Invasion, is, if you are at all interested in the future of America, of the future condition of the world, about what's happening around you, if you've just begun to question authority and begin to realize that this last administration has done a number on America, and can it be undone, or is it now woven into the fabric of our country and our culture? Have we empowered CARE as to be the voice of Islam in America so that they have an advocacy that is far greater than the democratic cause of this republic, of all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? That Stealth Invasion tells us about the quiet infiltration strategy, not random strategy, a strategic initiative for the globalization of Islam. And it's coming here. It is here. And unless we do something differently, it's going to grow here in America. Leo Hohmann, thank you for your resolute conviction to share this story, to take your personal epiphany and then make us a part of it in sharing this with us. Thank you, WND and WND Books, for sending us terrific authors on bold, provocative subjects that must be addressed. Leo, thank you so much. I hope to see you again.
Thank you, Eric.
When I come over to visit my
you and
my
God
daughter.
bless your work.
Thank you so much. My daughter lives in Atlanta, so I'm over there. Maybe I'll give you a call, and we'll get together. And if you happen to make the journey 2.5 hours west, come on over. The way over is only an hour and a half because of the time change.
Exactly. I get to save an hour. I would love to do that. Love to meet you personally.
Good. Thank you so much, Leo Hohmann. Thank you very much, WND Books. Tune in tomorrow. These 3 interviews will be up on our YouTube channel. We encourage you to subscribe to Igniting a Nation's YouTube channel. We will make this available later on this evening to you, and go to our Books and Media page and order this book right away, along with House of War by Dr. G.M. Davis and See Something, Say Nothing by Phil Haney. We'll be back with you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Central Time, and until then, we wish you shalom.